Liberals are skilled at controlling the narrative. Liberals have citizens debating the nature of freedom, rights, race, and hate. But these are ideas they define. Hate is defined as the causative factor in racism, oppression, slavery, misogyny, homophobia, Islamophobia, and all infringements of our human rights. It is liberals who benefit from the narrative on human rights, as a claim all humans have the same rights. Liberals use hate as a tool for gaining support for a particular narrative. Racism is defined as the hatred of minorities by whites. Xenophobia is the fear of minorities by whites. Homophobia is the fear of gays by Christian whites, and so on. The strategy is successful because it puts the person accused of hate on the defensive. No reason for the hate need be given because hate is inexcusable. The victim or ally needs only to accuse a white person of hate. The target must dissuade his accuser of the premise, but there is no way to do this because the accusation is based on the accuser's perception of events. To be accused of hate forces whites to question his or her motives. Whites fall for the ploy because we feel guilty for having become the dominant culture. We are in the position of a person who wins so many times, and with such ease he begins to handicap himself. Hate is not an accusation which can be defended against. The supposed victim is not talking about a crime, they are talking about how the white person makes them feel. The minority person hates whites and blames white people for his feelings as bullies blame their victim for making them be violent. Whether this is intentional or unintentional does not matter. The dynamic assumes it is the person attacked, the white person, who ought to pacify the aggressor. The question is, how does a victim cease causing a negative emotional reaction in the bully, which in this case is the minority person? It only requires a minority to feel bad about a white person to justify them striking out. Any feelings of fear or anxiety or emotional negativity in the minority is the white person's fault. Why is the argument that blacks were enslaved because they could be not an acceptable explanation? Racism does not explain blacks who enslaved other blacks. A power imbalance is the explanation for all other examples of slavery. Those who could be enslaved often were. Why is a peculiar explanation needed for a singular event not needed to explain all other incidences of slavery? The might makes right explanation is sufficient for all other cases of slavery. But it is an explanation that does not work with black enslavement by whites. Black chiefs sold black citizens, black, mostly Muslim slave traders marketed black slaves to white and black slave traders, and black people owned and traded in slaves, but enslaving black people is racist when done by whites. Claiming liberals are obsessed with race might be true, but the claim plays into the liberal narrative. Being obsessed with race and racial issues does not prove their assertions are false or that their obsession is unwarranted. Whites could still be racist regardless of how preoccupied liberals are with the topic. Blacks could still be oppressed regardless of how often they opine about it. The effort to discredit liberals by pointing out their obsession is no more effective than the defense complaining a prosecutor is obsessed with gaining a conviction. A better tactic would be to ask why blacks are obsessed with white people. We might even question why liberals would want to portray themselves in such a negative way. The liberals' obsession with race is not justified by a look at history. The racist narrative is nothing more than a way to legitimize the liberal agenda. Conservatives do not question liberals' hate for racism. They do not analyze the liberal agenda because they give liberals the benefit of any doubt they have. Conservatives may even give them credit for what they do while thinking they do it poorly. To question the liberal agenda indicates racism. The concern that liberals have for intersectional groups appears justified. Black people were enslaved by whites. There was segregation and oppression of black persons. To argue that the focus on white harm is unjustified would only give credence to the claim that whites are racist. However, hate is never warranted. The old adage that two wrongs do not make a right has merit. The left's hatred of white racism is not distinguishable from racism. Hate is hate. If liberals are justified in hating whites, then whites are justified in hating back. Hate only breeds hate. If Joe considers he is justified in hating Bill because Bill is racist, then Bill will feel justified in hating Joe. The power of the liberal narrative is that they fight what we all fight. But they accuse whites of siding with the enemy. Accusations of racism put white people on the defensive, which is where the left want us to be. We are in a losing game. There is no evidence that could prove whites are not racist when black people and the black experience is the sole adjudicator. What whites have not yet figured out is that we are dealing with hate. Liberals cannot prove they hate slavery or discrimination either. By attacking conservatives for racism, they divert attention from their own record. Their innocence is based on how fully they ally with blacks against us. The knee-jerk reaction is to assume if racism is wrong, hatred for racism is right. What liberals avoid is asking if hate is justified. That may be because the intent of liberals seems to be to find a justification for how they feel about conservatives. What is never asked is if they hate is justified, which is not all hate justified. If you hate us because of our color, our politics, and our religion, why ought we not hate you for your features? Christians are cautioned to hate the sin, but not the sinner. But racism is not a sin. Sins are not tied to groups or races. If racism is a sin, communism is a sin and liberalism is a sin. Sin is not an attribute of a group. Only individuals are accountable for their actions. A person is condemned for his acts, but the motive is irrelevant. Hate is not excused because of skin color, nor is skin color a justification for hate. But your hate is not justified by the reason for your hate. The January 6th intrusion into the Capitol by unruly protesters is a case in point. The protesters committed individual acts of trespass for which individuals have been charged. The MSM has made the actions of a few protesters a reason to hate everyone on the right. The same response occurred following the Charlottesville protests. Trump remarked there were good and bad on both sides. The comment pertained to individuals. This is always true in any and all groups. We certainly cannot make blanket statements about everyone in a group. Individuality is lost in the narrative of identity politics. The strategy of the left ought to be clear now. They have divided the world into victim groups and an oppressor group. The demonization of white people justifies the rapine to which we are subject. Hate is not an emotion, it is an activity. To dislike someone is not a hate crime. To hate someone is to deprive them of what they are entitled to. Hate is the physical act of taking value from someone. Hate is an expropriation of value without recompense. Hate is a scam liberals play on white people. We do not hate, it is the left that hates because it is the left that is doing the harm. Claims of white racism, white supremacy, and white privilege justify the hate of the left for we on the right. But the hate is a justification for the expropriations they levy on Christians. If the left broke off all contact with the right, the hate might have some merit. But this is not what happens. We are canceled off social media when we challenge their narrative, but they still want access to our wealth. Whites are deemed racist based on a history fabricated by the left. The success of whites means they oppressed other groups. There is no personal failure on the left. Inequality is always blamed on an oppressor. Even were we to accept the liberal narrative, no reason is given why whites have an obligation to help non-whites. There is no theory explaining why racism is wrong, especially if we are different races. The left does not have a moral philosophy that demonstrates no race ought not to press an advantage over weaker populations. No liberal proved white people are the only ones who won a war, enslaved anyone, or took advantage of a weakness in another people's military. But it is white people who are singled out for demonization, despite doing nothing more than what every other population did, even if we did do it better. Liberals are hypocrites who have aced the fine art of finding the straw in other people's eye, but who have in the process lost all awareness of the beam in their own. The fact minorities have often failed to do as well as many whites is the sole evidence liberals have for racism. But even so, why ought not white people take advantage of every privilege and advantage they have? Would it not be irrational not to do so, especially in a capitalist environment? But is private ownership not the issue? Accusations of racism are just a mechanism to obliquely denounce private ownership. The left wants power, and private ownership is the barrier between the left and communism. Freeloading does not just expropriate wealth, it breaks down the citadel of private ownership. No one has a right to be loved or even liked. No one has a right to be free of hate, whatever its source. We are free to dislike and to hate whom we wish as much as we wish, if we so choose. Hate is not a crime any more than disgust or indifference. If hate is a crime, why is abortion not a hate crime as it results in the death of an innocent life? Imagine an alien race arrives on Earth and it is so repugnant and looks all Earthlings are immediately and irreconcilably repulsed. In the truest sense of the word, Earthlings are racists. It cannot be disputed. Some might say we ought to love our celestial neighbors, but what does this mean? If we love them or say we do but forbid them entry into our atmosphere, what does our love amount to? If we say we hate them and find them repulsive yet extend resources to them because they are in need, what does our hate mean? The war against hate by liberals is a war against our avarice and our unwillingness to share what we have with others. Because these others are often of a different race, our greed and selfishness is attributed to racial factors. But what it all comes down to is that white people own private property and refuse to embrace communism, and that is all the racist trope of the liberal caucus comes down to.